So welcome to Talking Pictures. This is Michael Dow and myself, Mary Stack. We're here to discuss the latest movies that we've been to see and to give you our spin on our thoughts. So we're going to look at 4 movies today. Ocean's 8, Hereditary, On Chesil Beach, and Won't You Be My Neighbour? So we'll start off with Ocean's 8. Which is the latest episode in the Ocean saga, which is a heist movie. I think the original was in the 60s. The Frank Sinatra Rat Pack did this film, and then they decided it was a good modern idea. So it morphed then into George Clooney, Brad Pitt. This time, we've had the gender treatment. We've got an all-female, star-studded gang.
With a tangential relationship to the previous Ocean's films, mainly that Debbie Ocean is the sister of Danny Ocean, George Clooney's character.
Right.
But beyond that, there's not all that much of a narrative link.
Nothing.
But it's the exact same genre. Yeah.
Same genre. Yeah. And Steven Soderbergh actually produced this one. And Gary Ross, who did The Hunger Games, directed it. So it looks great. It moves along at a great old clip. It's quite funny. It's got a good soundtrack. I liked some of the characters. Sandra Bullock is in there, heading up the team. She's just fresh out of prison, and she puts together this motley gang of women, some of whom are friends. Kate Blanchett's pretty good as the villain, and has some horrible lines in it. And Helen Bonham Carter is wonderful in it, playing this Irish designer. And then Anne Hathaway's in there, and they're going to steal this Cartier jewellery from the Met Gala ball. So that's the plot. That bit doesn't really hang together for me. I mean, it's very glitzy, nice dresses, very slick direction. The plot is not great. I don't know what you thought, Mike. I mean, it's amusing. It's definitely amusing. There's this character, the token male, I think, is Brian Brown, the Australian actor, who just plays this dupe, and unconvincing that he could possibly have been a villain, a successful villain, and he gets corralled into this plot and falls for it. And that was the bit that was really weak for me.
Yeah, well, I think you felt it was overly contrived, the way he gets entangled, and it becomes, maybe the one weak point there is that it becomes a bit of a revenge fantasy for Sandra Bullock's character.
It does, yeah.
You know, but that's, for me, that was almost secondary and almost not necessary. First of all, I mean, a couple things to say. First of all, about Gary Ross as a director. He's nowhere nearly as flashy, and he doesn't have an eye towards style the way Soderbergh did with the earlier Ocean's films. But it was funny because I went in with reasonably low expectations. I love genre films, and every now and then you kind of need a kind of reminder of how great genre can be. And for me, on the one hand, even though Ross is a bit of I don't want to say pedestrian director, maybe a middle of the road director, he's a kind of a safe director. He doesn't take risks necessarily. I mean, he directed films like Pleasantville, which is pleasant, you know, Seabiscuit, also pleasant. He makes pleasant films, and this film was very pleasant for me. But as a genre exercise, it reminded me, especially with something like a heist film, how just enjoyable that is, like unapologetically enjoyable to see people getting away with criminal activity, and you find yourself identifying with it, and that alone is a lot of fun. So, you know, the direction, as I say, I think what it is, it's not that I'm looking for some kind of directorial stamp from him, but you could sense 5 minutes or so in that this guy understands the genre, he knows how to steer the ship, and it's an exercise. You know, and so once you recognize that this is like a heist film, like 10,000 other heist films, you just roll with it, and it's a lot of fun. And there's a great fluidity to the film. It rolls right along. It doesn't take any pauses. It doesn't, you know, slow down in at any moment. It's very consistent. But you also mentioned the performances, and I think that's, in some respects, where the film comes alive. Because it's funny, the two major stars, Blanchett and Bullock, you kind of expect the film to center more on them, but I found the film almost giving itself over to all the
other characters.
Yeah, the secondary characters. And you see these major players like Anne Hathaway, Helena Bonham Carter, who are both fantastic in it. People have never really had any great admiration for, but they almost steal the film in some ways because they kind of play up the character actor aspect of it. You know, they're kind of comic relief. I thought Helena Bonham Carter, especially as the kind of ditzy, slightly past her prime designer, who is trying desperately to keep up with the kind of slyness of the scheme, you know. Yeah, I mean, she's especially fantastic.
Yeah.
And as I say, I was just really surprised at how much I genuinely enjoyed it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good, fun night out.
And I don't know what you made of too. And another thing too, was also refreshing about it, especially in this day and age, is that it's a film that even though it has a predominantly female cast, it doesn't play up the gender politics. It doesn't make too much out of that.
No,
which in this day and age, it's almost
refreshing.
Too easy a thing to do.
Yeah.
What I got a sense of is that the Blanchett and Bullock characters, there's a relationship there. But what kind of relationship, to the extent the relationship ran in the past, they don't make a lot out of it. And it's all implied, which I thought was likewise very refreshing. Yeah.
So now Michael's going to talk to us about a film I did not see, Hereditary. So.
Yeah, well, it's another one of those horror movies. So if any chance I can get to kind of babble on about horror, it's great. But especially when a horror film like this comes along, that's as effective as it is. It's one of those films, again, that I know plot summary is necessary, but it's almost, you'd be giving too much away to talk about anything I would think beyond, let's say, the first act of the film. So what it focuses on very briefly is the kind of domineering, overbearing matriarch of an American family passes away. And this happens pretty much at the beginning. It's the first major event of the film. And you get the sense right away that all wasn't quite right with Grandma. That there are all these hints and kind of symbolic implications that she was involved in some kind of cult or some kind of secret society. And the film just goes from there, and it just spirals out in all kinds of unexpected ways. So the contrivance or the precept of the film is that the question becomes, was Grandma a member of a cult? Was she, into kind of demonic practices, whatever it is? But again, like any great horror film, it uses that kind of gimmick, that kind of plot device, that trope, to investigate very sensitive and transgressive taboo issues. And this film does what a lot of great horror films do, is that it investigates the family, okay? And a lot of what happens in the film is the dynamics amongst the family members come to the foreground, and it deals with ambivalence that one feels towards family members, like a mother maybe resenting a son, or regretting having a child, or the conflicts that occur between a husband and a wife when the marriage isn't solid. So it's a very intense and confrontational interrogation of family politics under the guise of horror, right? So it's a fantastic exercise.
So it's real horror.
It's genuine horror, yeah. And if you're going to see a film that has a coherent plot with an easy resolution, this film is absolutely not that. And I'm all the more grateful for it. It's very challenging, and it's very much like an art house horror film as well. It owes a lot to Rosemary's Baby, and also a film from a few years ago called The Babadook, which, if people haven't seen it, it's phenomenal. And also just the performances as well. Toni Collette should get a nomination for this film because she's extraordinary, and she exposes a kind of vulnerability that you rarely see in any film, let alone horror. So I feel, after this kind of string of horror films that have come along, A Quiet Place, films that I've been very disappointed with, it's great to see a legitimately challenging horror film break through, have financial success, and be an uncompromising experience as well. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm waiting for the punch.
Yeah, well, I keep trying to sell these horror films to you so that you drag yourself in to see one. And it's like, this one's good. Yeah.
So I'm not sure quite how this segues into First Reformed, but I thought we ought to mention First Reformed because it didn't stick around very long, but I thought it was an amazing film. Disturbing, intense, dark. Again, Ethan Hawke is he's in his prime right now. I cannot say enough good things about this.
And it's so great when there's someone you've never really considered in any particular way, all of a sudden they have this kind of like breakthrough in their career, and they start doing very serious, worthwhile stuff. Not to write off the guy's career prior
No.
to now, but you know, he's really. It's great to see actors taking on roles. As I say, like Toni Collette, it's like she's taking on a role that's like you're exposing your soul here. You know,
Right.
And I imagine Ethan Hawke's is similar in that regard, right? In this film,
Definitely. So try, if you can, to see that because it's not in a lot of cinemas now. It was whisked away.
And what's the plot, such as it is?
He's a very disgruntled, unhappy, solitary minister of a failed Dutch Reformed church in upstate New York. You can relate to him. And he encounters an environmentalist. And one conversation with this man changes his life. And I'm not going to tell you any more than that because it's just a weird and very strange denouement in the plot, which shocked a lot of people. There were a lot of strange comments as they left the cinema. However, I thought it was profound and it reminded me of 2001: Space Odyssey for lots of reasons.
Grandiose themes.
Yeah, and soundtrack, very memorable soundtrack.
Yeah, but at the same time, it just it sounds almost like kind of an Ingmar Bergman-esque study as well about austerity, religious
minimalism,
faith, religious doubt.
Yeah, stock, and redemption of some sort.
Yeah. And does it follow a kind of coherent path as well? Because as I say, I like those films that it's like it comes to a point in the film where you don't quite know what's going on, but you're rolling with it because you kind of trust that the filmmakers and the performers know what they're doing and what they're getting at, even if it's not explicit?
It's there are a lot of questions.
Yeah.
It is not. It's strange fruit. Mm-hmm. Strange fruit. That's all I'm going to say. Which leads me to the other film I'm going to talk about, which is On Chesil Beach, which is the Ian McEwan novel, British novelist. Interesting, beautifully shot film. First-time director Dominic Cook, who's worth watching because it's splendid on the eye. I also think there's two performances. Saoirse Ronan, the Irish actress who's doing phenomenal things, and Billy Howell, who I've never seen before, play this kind of unfortunate couple, and the whole plot hinges around their wedding night. So it's really only 24 hours in their life, but it's an epic, a very sad 24 hours, mostly because of flashbacks, which aren't fully explained. Of the two, he should have more problems because he comes from an extremely dysfunctional family. His mother is brain damaged, and there are scenes of her running around naked and sort of strange things. For the time, this is just on the cusp of the 60s, so there's this undercurrent of change in the film happening. CND marches, the Beatles and Chuck Berry.
I've heard of those people.
So there's a lot of texture to the film. It's I think a lot of people found it very frustrating, the ending. It does go down this sort of rabbit hole where there's a sort of nostalgic reunion, which is not altogether believable. Very bad makeup as well. But anyway, other than that, it's a sensational, searing psychological trip, because you never fully understand why she is as screwed up as she is, which only comes out on the wedding night. One gets the sense that there has been some abuse with the father, but that's never fully explained. It's just hinted at. And you feel terribly sorry for this man who has this stuff all dumped in his lap as a wedding gift and doesn't know what to do with it. So I thought it was very believable. Friends of mine thought it was terribly unbelievable. So maybe it's British and enigmatic. I don't know. It's worth seeing, definitely worth seeing. So excellent voyage, visually, and also characters are good. So now to our...
So let's get to the film that blew me away this week.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think even more so than even Hereditary, but it's... First of all, it's extremely anomalous to see films that we all like. You know, it's like that we both like uniformly more or less. It's like, because usually I'm like ready to tear something apart from the disappointment that I experience with contemporary movies, but it's been a good streak. So the movie that I want to really like emphasize that people need to see, regardless of where you come from or what your attitude towards the subject matter is Won't You Be My Neighbor? which is the Fred Rogers documentary. And it's interesting because if you look at the trailer for the film or the previews or whatever, it's like, oh, Fred Rogers movie, God, that's got to be such an easy thing to make. I mean, they're just going to kind of make a film that's sentimental and it's a nice summary of his life. But it's not, and the film does something quite interesting. It tries to get at the heart or the essence of who Fred Rogers really was, while also at the same time maintaining that sense of enigma that I think people kind of have towards him. You know, who was he really, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, was it just a great act?
Yeah,
I mean, that comes up quite often. Was this the real deal?
And of course, and then it makes you kind of feel, like it makes me feel bad, because like, oh, I'm just a cynic, and I can't, you know, it's like, you know, and that's really part of it. And you walk away from the film really believing that, you know, this was very much an integral part of his character. One of the points of the film is that people don't recognize how much will it took on his behalf to be that person that, you know, translated so effectively through the TV screen. But the film begins basically by addressing that question. You know, it's like, who was Fred Rogers? Was his message really effective? You know, how great was his influence? And would his message work today? And what at first I was a little frustrated by was that the film doesn't necessarily answer those questions. But then I thought, but it's asking me that question. You know, it's asking me to draw my conclusions as to who Mr. Rogers really was or what he meant to me.
And we should mention the director, actually.
Yeah, well, I was going to mention too, is Morgan Neville, who, and looking him up, he did, I think,
20 feet.
And he also did the, The Best of Enemies, the Gore Vidal, William Buckley documentary, likewise extraordinary.
So it makes it look easy.
Yeah, makes it look easy. But exactly, if you think about, you know, how many topics...
900 episodes, apparently.
Yeah, and never mind the amount of footage you have to deal with, but also you're dealing with historical context, which the film does. The transformative period that the show was kind of located in.
Right.
And it wasn't just a matter of
parallels,
artificially attaching his influence, let's say, to racial issues in the 60s or Vietnam or assassination. Rogers took those things on in a very confrontational way in the show, and it's easy to forget how much of a social activist he was through the medium of television. And he's one of those, rare people, I feel, who understood the power of the medium for good, even though I think he was racked himself with a great deal of doubt as to the effectiveness of the medium itself. And the fact that he chose to do that over being a minister, a Presbyterian minister, I find fascinating.
That's what his ministry was, which I think they couldn't get over.
Yeah.
This was going to be his ministry.
Yeah.
He was going to talk about children, their psychological well-being, the fact they had feelings from a very early age. I mean, I think that was the part that really impressed me, was how easy and effortless, almost like he drifts along and you think, oh, this man's just charismatic and having a good day. When in fact he had really done a lot of work studying with the thinking psychologists, the powers of the day.
Yeah, he's coming out of that era of the Benjamin Spock era where, you know, the very definition of things like masculinity and child rearing and what is discipline and how do you reach a child.
And
those
anger,
concepts,
things like anger.
And you sense with the show that he's really trying to grapple with those issues. You know, how do we make these new theories? How do we bring them into practice? And to me, he was the beacon for that. And never mind the fact also that he was likewise, as I say, grappling with the negative influence of television. There was the whole, in the 60s, you know, the Vast Wasteland, Newton Minnow's kind of assault on television and how, you know, it's going to be the great dumbing down thing. And he really tried to swim upstream and fight against that.
And they actually showed him in front of
Congress,
Congress.
and how he
getting the $20 million for PBS, which I never knew.
Yeah, exactly. Whether or not, you know, he was the single-handed, you know, champion of that, maybe that's a little bit reductive in terms of how the film deals with that. But he was the persuader, you know, and he had an extraordinarily persuasive influence.
And the most unlikely shtick.
Yeah, exactly.
To go before Congress with.
Exactly, and I got to say too, just on a personal level, and I'm sure anybody who sees this film, you will be like astounded the extent to which he has had an iconic influence on our culture. I mean, every shot. I mean, watching the film, it's like I was reminded that I know every corner of his imaginary house. You know, it's like I know the fish tank. I know, you know, every little detail just came roaring back to me in this, and it was more than nostalgia. because I recognized too, it caused me to think, it's like, well, what influence did he have on me as a person? And it really got me thinking about it. And a couple of things that are a takeaway from the film, and you'll get this impression from the film, that he was, as far as a persona, he was this brilliant listener. He could sit in silence and listen to you, whether you're talking or whether you're a musician. There's a great scene with Yo-Yo Ma. And Yo-Yo Ma says it was uncomfortable at first because Fred would lean right into my face while I'm playing. And I was like, and then it dawned on me, it's like, he's listening to me. He's actually
like a child would, he said.
like a child would.
Right up close.
Yeah, and if I can say that there was any lesson learned from that show for me, it was how to listen. And I find myself, even as an adult, when I'm really listening, I lean in, and it's all in the eyes, and it's just all in the silence of giving yourself over to that other person, whoever that person is, because they have their own autonomy. And I learned, I can't say I only learned it from him, but it really did.
And he wasn't scared of silence, which
no,
it wasn't
not at all.
dead time. It was interesting because a lot of the people that worked on the show were interviewed, in addition to his family members.
It's mainly a talking heads movie.
And it's wonderful. I mean, they show you this comical side to Fred that are almost, it's almost a little risque. Yes. And then there's that usual investigation. Was he straight? Was he gay? They had to go down that path as well. And he was just accommodating. For the time, very accommodating. I mean, he couldn't come out and let the guy who was the black mailman,
right, yeah,
declare that he was gay.
Right,
but he knew he was gay.
He was the policeman.
The policeman.
Yeah. Well, Fred Rogers' attitude is like, let's deal with one volatile social issue at a time.
Right. And he did it subtly too. I mean, he had the guy putting his feet in making a statement clearly
which was
at the time.
Direct, and again, it wasn't superfluous. It wasn't, okay, let's kind of tack on the historical context. It really, his show filtered that. His show was like a filtering medium for the times themselves. So it was perfectly appropriate for the film to deal with those issues in the particular way that it does. And I also want to say too that, because anybody who knows the show knows that it spent a lot of time in fantasy and imagination, and there was a gallery of puppets on the show and everything. I just want to mention one thing the film spends a lot of time on is the character Daniel Striped Tiger, who the film makes the argument that this little tiger puppet was Fred Rogers' alter ego, and the film spends a lot of time on that. And it's just so emotional. I mean, even if you don't know the show, it's hard not to watch it and see. It's like, wow.
It's very moving.
It returns you to a kind of childlike state. Yeah.
And there were a couple, as you say, enigmatic. I came away with a couple of deep questions about him. First of all, his impact. I mean, he has got this Gandhi presence to him that's fresh and pure and on some level uncorrupted. And even one of his sons said it was quite difficult growing up with the second Christ in the household.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, maybe that's an overstatement, I don't know, but he certainly had tremendous ability to do good. I think that's what he saw his work as, doing good.
Right.
And then the second question was his own personal anxiety about himself and whether he was good enough. Yeah. That comes out. I mean, he exuded this easy, charisma and charm, but actually he was deeply anxious and troubled. And I actually wanted to know more about that, about his childhood and his background, which we didn't really...
Well, that's what I say. I mean, the film, as I say, as soon, 10 minutes in, you realize it's like, this film has so much to tackle. It's almost just like it whets your appetite to know more. It's almost like I want the 1,000-page definitive biography. It's like I really, really want to get to know this guy. So there is a lot of that.
A lot of wisdom in what he said. It looked simple, but it was so wise.
And also too, it's like for people, whether you're of faith, but I think it's even of greater value to people who aren't of faith, because he put his values, his religious values, into practice, and he was able to translate that into something purely universal, so that you could watch that show as a child, whether or not you were in the church, whatever your denomination, didn't matter. That he took his faith and turned it into a kind of universal.
Practice.
Humanitarian language. And there's no higher, I sound like I'm proselytizing, but there's no higher calling than that. Yeah, to be able to translate your worldview, filter it through your faith, and get that across to anyone from any culture, from any class, is an extraordinary accomplishment.
So we started with a cult, we're ending in a cult. No, we loved Mr. Rogers, so we urge you to go and see it. And it's slightly easier to get into than The Incredibles, which neither of us were able to get into because of the lines. So thank you for joining us again, and goodbye for now.
Take care. Goodbye, Mary.
Bye, Michael.
Was that snarky too? Should we do it again?